Please join me in welcoming Phillip McDaniels, our speaker today. He is well known to everyone here in the Wichita Postcard Club, for he is the editor of our monthly newsletter. And we all appreciate that, believe me. Phil has had a long time interest in this topic, which is George Cornish. And I'm going to let him tell us all about him, and the title for his talk today is Photographing History, George Cornish, Ark City, Kansas. And take it away, Phil, please.
Thank you, Al. I appreciate it. And thank you, Alan, for the background work. Just a couple of things before I get going with my presentation. You're going to learn two things during this presentation. Number one, you're going to find out that I am not a public speaker, and I'm going to get through this. I'm going to stumble. I'm going to forget my words, forget my train of thought, and be totally confused at times. Bear with me. With your help, I'll get through this. The second thing is you're going to learn a whole lot about the history of the Southern Plains. Kansas and Oklahoma are just fascinate me with the vivid history, the hardships that the pioneers and the early homesteaders had to go through to settle this area. I enjoy learning, and I hope that you can pick up and learn some facts about where we live here on the plains today. Wikipedia states that George Bancroft Cornish was born in 1867 and died in 1946. Says he was an early 20th century photographer of portraits and scenes from the American West, including Native Americans and ranchers. Based out of Arkansas City, Kansas, the Library of Congress has 4 of his images in their collection. The University of Kansas libraries have a collection of his papers. There's just a little bit more to the story than that. But first, I want to say that the story told here and the material used and ultimately the reference book that came as a result has been a collaboration between a large group of people, very similar to the story that I will tell you today. Lifetime Wichita Postcard Club member Scott Damon and his wife Lee put together a wonderful collection of Cornish postcards and then fortified that collection with, as Paul Harvey used to say, the rest of the story. Upon his passing, Lee graciously allowed me to document these holdings. And in 2003, I began that task. Through a failure of mine to communicate clearly, the collection was broken up and sold before I had fully completed recording all of it. I feel we've come close to documenting most of the postcards that George Cornish made between 1904 and 1909. But what escaped us were the backstories on Cornish, his business, and even the subjects. Like I say, this has been a collaboration. I've just put it together. And I have to thank Larry Rhodes of Ark City, Kansas, who helped me immensely when I first started this project. He's an amazing storehouse of facts and figures and knowledge of the region. Morgan Williams has helped more recently and has been a tremendous help in putting this together. He supplied rare postcards that I've never seen before. His knowledge on the subject is immense. He's supplied facts, figures, newspaper articles, many related fields to help this story unfold. And it's very much appreciated. And of course, we have to thank Hal Ottaway for all he has done for the club and myself, and Alan Milbrandt being the real brains behind putting these Zoom meetings together. And I can't thank everybody enough for that. I think to get the whole story, we need to go back in time before this story starts. Back to the year 1803, when the United States government, for $15 million, bought from France most of the land west of the Mississippi River to the continental divide of the Rocky Mountains, and then north up to Canada. In reality, France controlled just a small area of the purchase, primarily Louisiana. Most of this land was inhabited by Native Americans, so actually, the United States bought the rights to obtain Indian land by treaty, or more often by conquest. Explorers and immigrants had long crossed Kansas, moving over the land to get to or find someplace better. Coronado, the first in 1542, as he came up from the southwest, searching for Cibola, the 7 cities of gold. He didn't find it. Few, if any, of these early travelers had any reason to stop their journey here. The public land surveys of Kansas Territory in 1855 to 60 recorded a Mormon road or trail in some of the northern Kansas counties. The origin and existence has largely been overlooked. Over 4,000 Mormons were thought to have used this trail on their trek to Utah from predominantly Illinois. October the 26th, 1854, we proceeded today towards the 110 road on the California Mormon Trail. We marched rapidly over a dull, monotonous country consisting of high rolling prairie, not a shrub or tree to relieve the monotony, and no sign of human habitation until we reached the 110, the great California stopping place. From June 4th, 1812 until August 10th, 1821, Kansas would be unorganized territory. At the time of Missouri statehood in 1821, it had 0 permanent white settlement until Fort Leavenworth was established in 1827 by the 3rd U.S. Infantry from St. Louis, Missouri. The fort was established as the westernmost output of the American military to protect trade along the Santa Fe Trail from Native Americans. The Southern Plains were considered to be infertile by 19th century American pioneers. Called the Great American Desert, it lacked trees, was drier than land further to the east. After the invention of the steel plow and more sophisticated irrigation methods, the prairie soil could be broken for agriculture. And by the 1850s, immigration pressure started and organization into its own territory was sought after. The territory of Kansas was an organized, incorporated territory of the U.S. that existed from May 30th of 1854 until January 29th, 1861, our state birthday. Immigration from the free states, including Iowa, Ohio, and Illinois particularly, flowed into the territory beginning in 1854. These people were known as Free Staters and settled around the Lawrence-Lecompton area because Missourians, many from Kentucky, had claimed much of the land closest to the border. As these settlers came, this Kansas question became the centerpiece of an emotionally charged national debate. In the territory soon called Bleeding Kansas, the two sides squared off in a sometimes violent contest. Many historians have pointed to the events in Kansas at this time as the place where the Civil War began. The question of whether Kansas was to be a free or a slave state was, according to the Compromise of 1850, to be decided by popular sovereignty, or that is by vote of the people here. The question of who were the Kansans that were eligible to vote ended up causing armed conflict. Both pro-slavery and free state partisans encouraged immigration to Kansas so as to influence the vote. During part of the territorial period, there were 2 territorial legislatures with 2 constitutions meeting in 2 different cities. 2 applications for statehood, 1 free and 1 slave, were sent to the U.S. Congress. And finally, on July 29, 1861, the eastern portion of the territory was admitted to the Union as the Free State of Kansas. With the passage of the Homestead Act in 1862, the end of the Civil War, and the newly arrived Russian and German immigrants who brought with them turkey red winter wheat, which created a new profitable cash crop, the population boomed. Early photographers arriving at this time, many ex-Civil War veterans, found a ready market on the East Coast and in Europe for images of Indians and their culture, along with a new breed of hero, the American cowboy. With the perceived danger, allure, and romanticism of the opening of the West, the public was fascinated with this new lifestyle and eagerly sought photographic images depicting life and adventures in the New West. Shortly after Ark City was founded in 1870, Civil War photographer I.H. Bonsall opened a studio and gallery at the intersection of Central and Summit Streets in Arkansas City. The business flourished, and in 1879, he hired a 21-year-old apprentice named William Prettyman to assist him. Just arrived from the East Coast, nearly broke, and looking for adventure and excitement, he quickly learned the photography trade from his teacher and mentor. But studio work was restraining for an adventurer, and it was soon realized his newly developed talents should be used differently. This image from the Don Prettyman collection. As Bonsall aged, it was Prettyman who journeyed from the relatively civilized areas of southern Kansas to the still untamed Indian Territory just across the border. Driving a wagon led by oxen, he made a photographic record of the region, amassing an enormous amount of glass negatives that captured the area's traditions and spirit. As he gathered the trust and confidence of the many Indian tribes in the region, he became known as the Picture Man, and starting in 1883, his trips became an annual occurrence for the next 10 years. Image also from the Prettyman collection. But Prettyman was an adventurer, and as the Southern Plains were tamed, he longed for new adventures. Joining in the 1893 Cherokee Strip land run, he settled near Blackwell, Oklahoma, and left behind the glass negatives from his earlier travels. He ran a photography studio there, was mayor of Blackwell from 1901 to 1904, before chances of adventure further west lured him to California in 1905. His life as a photographer and historian was over. Prior to Oklahoma becoming a state in 1907, there were 5 land runs staged between 1889 and 1895 that distributed land initially set aside to relocate Indians that had been removed from their own ancestral lands. The initial land rush of 89 opened up 2 million acres of land in central Oklahoma that the federal government had never assigned to any specific tribe. And as improvements in farming and ranching practices increased in the late 1880s, these unassigned lands became more attractive to white settlement. Lincoln's Homestead Act of 1862 allowed settlers to file claims for 160 acres at no cost, as long as the land was improved and lived upon. The image of the young man with a pistol is from Scott Damon's collection. This is the only time I have seen this postcard. It was sold on eBay as part of the breaking up of the collection. This one I was able to track down later. It sold for $7.50, something I haven't got over to this day. During the first land run of 1889, due to the 90 miles that lay between Ark City and the allotted land to the south, the region did not play as an important of a role as it did in the Cherokee Strip run of 1893. However, various accounts still reported that the Santa Fe Railroad ran between 8 to 15 trains to Oklahoma from Ark City on April 22nd alone. One report read that the 8 coaches on the 8:45 a.m. run were so tightly packed with men that movement inside was impossible. A cabinet card from Morgan Williams' collection. 4 years later, at precisely 12 noon on September the 16th, 1893, a cannon's boom unleashed the largest of Oklahoma's land runs. Over 100,000 homesteaders registered for the race for new land, And Arkansas City was the largest of the 9 registration sites surrounding the 6.5 million acre strip. With the starting line just 4 miles south of town, it was a gateway and gathering point for the rush to the raw lands of northern Oklahoma. As early as spring, boomer camps began to appear. And by the September 16th starting date, various accounts estimated 30 to 50,000 people were camped along the Walnut and Arkansas rivers south of town. By the time of the Oklahoma land rush, America was in the grip of the worst economic depression it had ever experienced. And this was one of the factors that swelled the number of expectant land seekers that day. Many would be disappointed. There were only 42,000 parcels of land available, and far too few to satisfy the hopes of those who raced for land. Additionally, many of the boomers, those that had waited for the cannons boom before rushing into the land claim, found that a number of the choice plots had already been claimed by Sooners who had snuck into the land claim area before the race began. The impact of the land rush was immediate, transforming the land almost overnight. This image, for our purposes, is from the Oklahoma Historical Society. This is from the Oklahoma land rush of 1893, eyewitness to history. At last, the eventful morning broke, a day exactly like all the rest, hot and dry, a south wind rising with the sun dead ahead, and a hard proposition for us bicyclists. We had stayed overnight in a little hotel of a town within a mile of the border, several of us in one room. But at least we two, the bicycle corps, did not have to mix up with a jam of horses about the place. And we had another decided advantage in not having horses to look after in a hot prairie wilderness where there was not a well, scarcely a stream not gone to a dry bed, and only an occasional water tank on the one railroad running south to Texas. William Prettyman had a platform constructed overlooking the starting line south of town and instructed fellow photographers Cornish, P.A. Miller, and Thomas Kraft and his 16-year-old son to take pictures several seconds apart as the starting report sounded, and he entered the race. At 1 minute before 12 o'clock, my brother and I, noticing that the soldier out in front was squinting upward along his rifle barrel and intent on the coming signal, slipped out 50 feet in front of the line along the railroad embankment. It was the best possible place from which to view the start. Estimated that there was somewhere around 100,000 men in line on the Kansas border. Within the 2-mile range of vision that we had from our point of vantage, there were at least 5,000 and nearly 8. Viewed from out front, the waiting line was a breathtaking sight. We had seen it only from within the crowd or from the rear. The back of the line was ragged, incoherent. The front was even, smooth, solid. It looked like the lineup that it was. I thought I had sensed the immensity of the spectacle, but that one moment out front gave me the unmatched thrill of an impeding race with 6,000 starters in sight. While we stood, numb with looking, the rifle snapped and the line broke with a huge crackling roar. That one thundering moment of horseflesh by the mile, quivering at his first leap forward, was a gift of the gods, and its like will never come again. The next instant, we were in a crash of vehicles whizzing past us like a calamity. The funniest of all the starters was the engine with its 10 carloads of men. From our stand 50 feet directly in front of it, I was contemplating it as the chief absurdity of the race when the rush began. The engine tooted incessantly and labored hard, but of course she could not get underway with anything like the quickness of the horses. Of course, everybody in the train was mad with excitement, particularly since they were packed in without a chance to vent their emotions in any way but some noise-making way. With the first toots of the engine came revolver shots from the crowds all along the tops of the cars, and at least a few from those pinned up inside. The fusillade, which led up all the while the train was pulling out past us, had a most exhilarating effect. My old gun, I suddenly noticed, was barking with the rest of them. If you lived with your growing family in a rude one-room cabin, perhaps rented in the midst of a terrible economic depression, and the federal government offered you the opportunity to put a stake in the ground, a fertile rolling prairie, and you'd be given a multi-acre plot for free, would you consider it? The chaotic process of settlement continued to affect the region developed long after the land run. Towns were overbuilt, farmers went broke on land unsuitable for farming. Other similar problems assured that many claims were abandoned by the end of the year. There were, of course, success stories, just as there had been instances of neighborly actions, generosity, even gallantry during the run. Yet even those who managed to secure good land soon learned that farmers' opportunities were limited. The new towns, dependent on the farmers' business, faltered in a changing American economy in which the growth of industrialization had redefined the meaning of opportunity. The image here displays what life was like. It's a John Dedrick postcard. He was from Taloga, Oklahoma. And Hal Ottaway has given a presentation for the Western New York Postcard Club on him and his series of postcards. And this presentation can be found on YouTube, well worth the time, very interesting. Prettyman's protege, George Cornish, took over the business after Prettyman's moved to Oklahoma, although the actual date of the exchange isn't clear. Some accounts date this acquisition to 1905, but I found a Arkansas City newspaper article announcing the grand opening of Cornish's new studio, 112 East 5th Avenue on March 7th, 1898. Cabinet cards are known printed with both Prettyman and Cornish's names assuming a partnership, but the sequence from protege to partner to owner isn't too clear. And this is from Scott Damon's collection. It shows Cornish at work in his studio. Assisting George in his business, Sister Alice worked with him from the studio's founding until her death from an appendicitis attack in May of 1916. Brothers Arthur and Harry were also photographers. Arthur in Kansas City before moving on to Rochester to New York to work for the Eastern Kodak Company. This is also from Scott Damon's collection. I believe that is Alice on the far right. Cornish also had an assistant, Edith Baroth, who worked with him for decades. That could be her on the far left, but I am not certain. Just a wonderful picture. Cabinet card era. During the late 19th century, Cornish used many of Prettyman's early images on cabinet cards and then later on postcards, which at that time was a common way then to display photographic portraits. They usually consisted of a thin photograph mounted on cardstock and typically measured about 4.5 by 6.5 inches, or similar to a continental style postcard today. And this image here on the cabinet card was reproduced on a postcard image between 1907 and 1909. This is a reverse of the previous photograph showing the names of both Prettyman and Cornish. The card appears to have been used as a premium or a giveaway for an auto supply company in Ark City. So probably dates between the 1905, 1915 perhaps time span. The first auto, from what I understand, was introduced in Ark City in 1902. This is a cabinet card portrait of a young local family in Ark City. By the clothing that it's worn, probably would date it 1885 to 1895. It's from the Kirsten Laurel collection. Cornish built his first small photographic studio on 5th Avenue at A Street, where the city library now stands. The building's dimensions were only 16 by 30 feet, and Cornish worked hard to be accepted by early town builders and businessmen. who then were called the Fifth Avenue Ring by their critics. Good old boys, I'm sure. I found I was not any too welcome in my new neighborhood, and perhaps with reason, for the studio did not make a very imposing appearance when compared with the adjacent and nearby structures. The businessmen, who were his neighbors, wanted to make Fifth Avenue the main business district and street in town, but it was soon overshadowed by Summit Street that ran north and south across it. Cornish was forced to move to make way for a new U.S. post office that was to be built in 1914. But I think pressure from his neighbors helped him move and feel more at ease only a couple of blocks away to the west. I wanted to be able to say that I had never suspended business, so I employed Z.M. Johnson to move my entire plant by block and tackle. He did the job with neatness and dispatch. The building was moved across Summit Street, and indeed, he never missed a day's work during the move. Wonderful image, and this is from the Scott Damon collection. This cabinet card, one in a series of 4, is thought to be Cornish's earliest work in creating exaggeration images. A newspaper article from Ark City dated October 27, 1902 read, "The Topeka Mail and Breeze newspaper contained 3 of the corn pictures made by George B. Cornish of this city. They are attracting lots of attention. The early date of these images would put him at the forefront of exaggeration type design compared to other contemporary photographers of the day. Similar exaggeration work done by William Martin in Ottawa, Kansas, date to about 5 years after these images were created in Ark City. Of the 3 images as part of this series, we believe that this is the only one that was not reproduced on postcard size. This undivided back private mailing card predates Cornish's association with the Albertite Company that began in 1904 and is possibly his first foray into postcard production. This postcard is used and canceled on November 19th at Ark City, but unfortunately the postcard omits the year. I've looked under magnification. I want to tell myself I can see a faint 3 like 1903, but it might be hopeful thinking. The postcard era. Interior of the Cornish studio. Cornish jumped on a postcard craze and fad that swept the country with the legalization of the divided postcard authorized by Congress in 1907. This is a new postcard find shared with me recently by Morgan Williams. Written on the front of the card, it's a undivided postcard, so all the correspondence was on the front. May 1st, 1908, your draft for $4.20 to cover invoice of cards and pictures to date received today. And then it's signed, very truly yours, George B. Cornish. Just a wonderful historic postcard with his signature on it, addressed to a young lady in Fairfax, Oklahoma. Between 1904 and 1909, Cornish was creating and publishing scores of postcards, all using the collotype printing method, a trademark of the Albertite Postcard Company. We've established at least 137 different views created in the Albertite series during this time period, and at least that number again if you count the different titles used in the different printings. George Cornish was a very busy man during this time period. This is a watermelon blockade postcard, another well-known and well-liked, well-used postcard of its time. It comes in 2 varieties. This is without watermelon leaves. There is another variety that has leaves along the road and watermelons. George's other brother, Harry, was also in the photography business, and he had ran a studio in Elk City, Oklahoma, and by early 1910, Joplin, Missouri. These Elk City town views can thus be linked to his brother's studio there, as can the Missouri watermelon exaggeration cards with a typed instead of printed font. Harry moved often, including to Denver and Chattanooga, but at the time of his sister's death in 1916, a trade publication lists him as superintendent for the New Era Milling Company in Ark City, and helping to explain a link to that series of postcards. I had often wondered, since all of his views were of Ark City and the area, why he included some from Elk City. Didn't make sense. No other towns were noted in any of his cards. Made perfect sense when I found out that his brother had a studio there. I believe he made these to help his brother out, which it appears he did a number of times. I don't know Harry, but I kind of wonder if maybe he was the problem child or not. An extremely rare exaggeration card. Yours truly, George W. Hoyland, is pictured on there, a salesman for the New Era Milling Company. Every once in a while, one of these cards will be listed on eBay. They sell for a lot of dollars, very rare. And these, I'm sure, are all because of the fact that his brother, for a time, worked for this company. Again, him helping his brother out. An advertisement in the Arkansas City Daily Traveler newspaper dated October 27th, 1904, lists George as manager of the Fifth Avenue Opera House, located 1 block east of the Cornish studio. Constructed in 1897 and owned by businessman J.A. Rainey, whose fortune had been made shipping groceries by covered wagon into Indian Territory. Regarded as one of the nicest buildings of its kind between Kansas City and Denver, this foray into show business led Cornish to purchase and operate his own much more modest theater in 1907. This is a tinted, hand-colored postcard produced by Albert Type. We just recently learned from Dennis McBurney that was one of the options when you purchase from the Albert Type company. There were several different options of having tinting done to the postcards. Cornish owned and operated the open-air Pastime Electric Theater and assisted by his younger brother, Harry. They held their grand opening on July 20th, 1907, and screened moving pictures, as well as theatrical presentations and concerts. Open air, so it was open only during the warmer months, or better, hotter months between May and October. Kansas's extreme weather made rainouts and damage common, and by the spring of 1910, the business had closed. Amazingly, there's no known images or postcards showing the theater. George and Harry were arrested and charged with assault on a city marshal in October of 1908, when a fistfight occurred after Harry was asked to stop using a megaphone to entice customers. 2 weeks later, Harry was found guilty and fined $25. The case against George was dismissed. And these images are from the Scott Damon collection, showing some of the performers that worked and gave presentations in his theater. Another exceedingly rare exaggeration postcard from the New Era Milling Company. I wonder, after seeing the caption on this, compliments of Charles D. Turk, 316 Magazine Street, New Orleans. We know Harry was for a while in Chattanooga. Could New Orleans have been on his stops also? Cornish's postcard output included topics ranging from exaggerations to town views to life on the rapidly changing prairie. I know of no other similar sized town that has so much of its early history preserved as Ark City. This threshing wheat in Kansas postcard was probably taken at the 101 Ranch, which we will go into more detail later, in 1905. Again, wheat was first brought to Kansas by the Russian and German immigrants in the mid 1870s. First time wheat surpassed corn in terms of total production in Kansas was 1910. Now, these postcards are captioned differently because of being sold in different states. This is threshing wheat in Kansas, also known as Oklahoma and Texas. The Albertine Company printed their postcards using the collotype process, a printing process that gives accurate reproduction because no halftone screens are employed to break the image into dots. And I think we're all familiar with the dots looking closely on a printed postcard. In the process, a plate is coated with a light-sensitive gelatin solution exposed to light through a negative. The gelatin is hardened in exposed areas and is soaked in glycerin, which is absorbed most in the non-hardened areas. When exposed to high humidity, these areas absorb moisture, repelling the greasy ink. The hardened areas accept the ink, and the plate can be used to print a few thousand copies of the image, making a beautiful finished product. Very complicated. Today, there are only a few companies in the world creating images by this means. None are in the United States. I think there's 2 in Japan, 2 in Europe, primarily producing high quality art reproductions. I've tried to put a name to the face of this young lady posing. There are 3 different views of this same lady in the series. This is just gorgeous. There's another view standing by a horse and another view of her looking down the barrel of a revolver, painted or pictured and pointed towards a person. I can't say I've got anywhere in trying to decide if she was a performer at the 101 Ranch, a model, a townsperson, still a mystery. This beautiful print of Cayusa, a Caddo Indian maiden, was sold at the Cherokee Strip Museum and is in the larger 6x8 format that Cornish authorized. We know it was sold at the Cherokee Strip Museum. A lot of the cards and prints that they sold there were stamped on the back with a rubber stamp, Cherokee Strip Museum. This has that stamp. We know and believe that there were 10 different images produced in this 6x8 size. This particular one of the Indian maiden is the only one that we have not seen in standard postcard size. I believe it's out there. It's beautiful. I can't believe it's as rare as it is or unknown. Just a gorgeous image. We can only speculate as to which images were originally taken by Prettyman and which were taken approximately 25 years later by Cornish and used on the postcard series. Wonderful view of a homesteader's cabin. Homesteaders' closest neighbors, probably the mice, the crickets, snakes, wolf spiders that were nightly visitors. At least the wolf spiders would eat the crickets and keep that population down. A wolf spider is like a smaller, faster tarantula. High temperature in Ark City on Wednesday was 108 degrees. Earlier this summer, Ark City had a dew point of 82, which was far hotter than New Orleans, Miami, or Houston. It amazes me how the Southern Plains can have as high of a humidity than the Gulf Coast, but it happens. Life was tough for these people. You can see their possessions the wood stove in the front kind of intrigues me. Why wasn't it inside that cabin? Hardship, man, it was tough living. No Walgreens down the street, no Netflix, just no conveniences, just unbelievable hardships. It was tough. From the Winfield Courier, September 22nd, 1882. A gentleman who has recently lost his wife wishes to find homes for his two little girls aged 9 months and 5 years respectively. Any information desired will be furnished at T.S. Green, Postmaster, Akron. Life was tough. The lost material. I had documented all the postcards from Scott Damon's collection. Before I could get to the last folder, the collection was sold. Purely my fault. I didn't make my intentions clear. The image of the little black boy on the left with the turkey was well documented in that lost material. I can remember skimming it and reading it quickly when I first got the collection. I know he was a street urchin of the town, repeatedly in trouble with the law as he aged. And I know it talked about his untimely death, but the facts of it, I don't remember. And I can only hope that that part of the collection was saved and appreciated and added to a bigger collection by somebody. I've tried to track it down and have just gone blank on it. The postcard on the right is George's son, George Jr. I'm on my way. Arkansas City before the turn of the century. Two variations of this postcard, one showing a trolley down the middle of the street. On the other variation, the trolley is missing. I don't see any automobiles in the image, so I have to believe this was probably taken just before the turn of the century. From the June 3rd, 1922, Ark City Traveler newspaper. Headline, Big Class joins the Ku Klux Klan. Initiation is staged on hill near Blackwell, Oklahoma. Secret rites performed for 153, 2,000 Ku Kluxers in attendance. Standing on the hilltop near the Smith Farm, 4.5 miles east of Blackwell, about 9 o'clock last night were 2,500 Klansmen in their white hoods and bed sheets to witness the initiation of 153 new members. Ark City, Winfield, Blackwell, Newkirk, Ponca City, Enid, and Caw City were represented among the hooded figures. The Ku Klux Klanners had erected a 30-foot flaming cross on the crest of the hill, and special lighting was furnished by a dynamo on the farm. The scene was witnessed by people for miles around, the way it was 1920s. A wonderful Albert type postcard showing Ott Moore's pure food grocery store. Bunker and Fritz, the druggists. Another beautiful interior view of one of the businesses. If you look closely past the soda fountain on the right, you'll see a postcard spinner on the counter. Just a wonderful card. So great image of the TV Oldroyd Undertaking building. For 40 years, or since 1886, TB Oldroyd had been in business in Ark City. Came to the city in 1885 from Wayne County, Ohio, his native state. He liked the appearance of the rapidly growing border town and decided to cast his lot here. From the Ark City Traveler, December 29th, 1925. Thomas Oldroyd, veteran furniture dealer and undertaker in Ark City, who fell down the elevator shaft in the Oldroyd store on West 5th Avenue late yesterday, died of his injuries an hour after reaching Mercy Hospital. In the fall from the main floor of the building to the basement, a distance of 10 feet, his head struck the concrete floor. He suffered a fracture of the skull and never gained consciousness. waiting on a customer when he stepped to the door leading to the elevator shaft to call his son, Harry, who was on the second floor. He did not notice the elevator was not there, stepped off into the open shaft. A souvenir booklet featuring 3 views of the interior of the business, and nothing else is inside that souvenir booklet except the 3 postcards. This is from the Larry Smith collection. And these are the 3 postcards in it. I have never seen them anywhere else besides in that souvenir booklet. These are 2 more postcards showing businessman J.A. Rainey's buildings and empire. Rainey's wholesale grocery. On the left, you can see the loaded freight wagons out in front. And on the right, Rainey's Fifth Avenue Hotel. All beautiful buildings made out of limestone block. And many of the substantial buildings were constructed of stone, which was quarried from this Silverdale quarry, which is located east of town. Newspaper article mysteries. Are these cards still waiting to be found? On the left, Roy Roberts, who will be a candidate for state president of the Fraternal Order of Eagles at the meeting in Galena next week, has had some very clever advertising matter prepared to advance his candidacy. A picture of Roberts was taken sitting astride of a very large eagle whose wings are outstretched. And these pictures, made by George B. Cornish on the back of a postal card, are being mailed by Roberts all over the state. To the right, another newspaper article, Opportunityville. George B. Cornish has given Ark City a new name on a souvenir postal card, which he has just issued to advertise the go-ahead spirit of the town, so he calls it. He coins a new name for Arkansas City, very appropriately calling it Opportunityville. The souvenir card is a nice one, showing, as it does, a gas drilling rig on one end of the card, and a clever takeoff of McCutcheon's drawing of the mysterious stranger, a very prosperous and contented-looking citizen labeled Ark City. Card goes on to state that Ark City has natural gas for all purposes and asks the recipient to watch her grow. The card, like all of Cornish's creations, is clever and will be a good advertisement for the town. The commercial club and dozens of its members individually like the Cornish card so well that purchases are being made in lots of 100. It's a winner. Both of these cards are unknown. Both Morgan and myself searched pretty diligently for them. By the way, my father grew up in a gas oil company town called Rainbow Bend, right on the border of Southern and Cowley County. He lived when he was, probably 7 to 11 years old in a white frame worker's cabin, oil-filled cabin. And I have several real photo postcards of him and his family posing on the front porch of this house, I'm sure taken by an itinerant photographer, and value them tremendously. 2 other mystery cards, one of them solved. The Canatex Refining Company main offices were across the street from Cornish's studio in the 1930s. Canatex, abbreviation for Kansas, Oklahoma, and Texas. Refining company from Ark City. I've recently found an online article showing a photograph that shows George Cornish and several of the business officers posing for a picture in his studio. The postcard is published by Dexter Press, so that certainly dates it later than the Albert type series. This is the only postcard I know that does not date to the 1904-1909 period that Cornish produced, which to me is very surprising. And I'm sure it was a commercial undertaking by Cornish for the Canatex refinery. The postcard on the right is a mystery and probably one that'll never be solved. The town of South Haven, Kansas, depicted on this souvenir postcard, is 21 miles straight west of Ark City. On the middle space, souvenir city scenes from Cornish Studio, South Haven, Kansas. Now, I don't know if that means that one of the Cornish brothers had a studio in South Haven, or if it just means it's from the Cornish Studio and picture of South Haven. South Haven is a small town. It was a small town then. It's even smaller today. I tried to get some information from the Sumner County Historical Society. They were very helpful. We spent a considerable amount of time looking through books, historical data, anything at all to tell us the businesses in town, and struck out. There's just not much on the history of this small town, and we couldn't find anything conclusive. A neat mystery. Officially designated the Stone Bridge capital of Kansas by the Kansas legislature. In 2016, Cali County boasts 18 unique stone arch bridges, now to this day open to the public. This Dunkard Mill Bridge on the Walnut River is just one of the approximately 40 stone bridges built in Cali County after the turn of the century. Many were designed by Walter Sharp, who was a prominent architect from El Dorado, Kansas, who settled in Winfield, which is about 10 miles straight north of Ark City. Wonderful postcard showing the dedication of this bridge. If you look closely under the left arch, you'll see a band that was playing for the crowd. This is a letterhead for the 101 Ranch that George Cornish took the three images that are seen on that letterhead. 110 acres, a diversified cattle ranch and agricultural empire was founded by George Miller and was created by leasing land from the Ponca and Oto Indian tribes. After his death in 1903, it was run by his three sons, George, Joseph, and Zach, and became famous for the traveling Wild West shows that began after 1905, when newspaper editors and photographers were invited to celebrate an event called Oklahoma's Gala Days, then thought by many to be America's first rodeo. Remember that. Newspaper articles can trace Cornish's connection with the ranch to date to at least April of 1904. A newspaper article dated June 9th of 1905 reads, George Cornish received a telegram this morning from J.C. Miller, manager of the ranch, for 36 more pictures like he took last winter. Mr. Miller will give them to prominent newspapermen that will be at the Buffalo Chase this Saturday. Located 35 miles south of Arkansas City, near the non-existent town of Bliss, Oklahoma. 65,000 people attended the original show that was held on June 14, 1905. A newspaper article stated, George Cornish and George Roberts went to the 101 Ranch this morning to be in readiness for the great entertainment tomorrow. The former expects to take a number of pictures. The latter will report the news features. Mrs. Roberts will look after him so he'll not be able to give an exhibition ride on any of the fierce buffaloes he talks so much about. And you got to remember, in 1905, buffalo had almost been killed to the edge of extinction. They were a truly rare animal in 1905. George Cornish was just one of the many photographers present, and postcards produced by H.H. Clark of Oklahoma City and William Martin of Ottawa, Kansas, show many of the same scenes and events as Cornish recorded. The postcard on the right is from Cheryl DeJager's collection of Perry, Oklahoma. It's a colorized version of the Sundance, almost perfectly similar to the image on the upper left that George Cornish took. A few more banners are uplifted, but I've looked at the Indians in line there and they match up perfectly. on both of them. So they were either added or taken just moments before or after. They were either raised or lowered. Also, in the background of the image on the right, you can see the teepee in the background. Keep that in the back of your mind. In the fall of 1882, the citizens of Winfield, Kansas, were planning their first agricultural fair, and they needed some unusual entertainment to attract the necessary crowds. They presented their difficulty to Colonel George W. Miller, who had just finished a cattle drive up the Chisholm Trail and who still had with them a group of cowboys. With customary ingenuity, the colonel proposed an exhibition of roping and riding events, which was enthusiastically received by the people of Winfield. 22 years later, the next roundup show was held, which is viewed by many to be the first rodeo. The great Apache warrior Geronimo was escorted to the ranch from nearby Fort Sill, where he was a prisoner of the United States government. The performances began after the grand parade included Geronimo killing his supposed last bison. Now, in reality, he was an Apache Indian. He never hunted a bison because there were none in the Apache homeland. This would be his first and last run-in with a buffalo. Rather than using a bow and an arrow, Geronimo opted for a Winchester rifle. He was in the front seat of a car when he shot the bison. He later posed in the vehicle wearing a top hat for photographers. A fairly well-known postcard of him in that pose. Shortly after 2 o'clock, the procession, nearly a mile in length and escorted by the Miller brothers, came in at the east entrance. In the lead was a cavalry band, behind from which the famous old Indian war chief Geronimo, hero of 100 battles with the whites. He bowed and smiled and enjoyed immensely the attention he attracted from the mighty throng of people as he passed around the arena. Following this came other bands and a long procession of cowboys and Indians, the latter wearing their sacred finery. The pioneer wagon train, drawn by oxen, brought up the rear. The parade was a thrilling and spectacular sight, such as few people will ever see again or be permitted to witness in these days. And fortunate indeed were those who were inside the great amphitheater. After the parade, the arena was cleared and the program carried out as had been advertised. The large herd of buffalo, which had been secured at great expense, was turned into the enclosure, and a representation given of the genuine buffalo hunt, a thing of the past for nearly 40 years, and which will probably never again be seen in any country. Buffaloes, which were so numerous on the plains years ago, were now almost extinct, the only large herd in existence being the one on the 101 ranch. Over 200 Indians took part in the chase. On Saturday afternoon, a single buffalo was killed. It had been the plan of the Millers to kill but one bull for a feast of buffalo meat and to add pictureness to kill him by the chase instead of merely shooting him at the slaughterhouse. The old bull was driven from the herd and chased by the Indians up in front of the White House, where he was finally killed. The editors had buffalo meat for dinner that evening. This is a Martin postcard showing the supposedly the carving of the buffalo. I've often wondered what Cornish was doing while this activity was going on. Again, lots of images from this 1905 original show. Cornish was there, but he missed out on some of the pictures. This is a current photo of George's newest studio that he had built in 1924 at 5th and 1st Street. It was built in the grand Spanish colonial revival style that had been in vogue since the Panama, California exposition held in San Diego in 1915. Edith Baruth was an assistant to George from 1912 until his death in 1946. She continued to run the business, purchased it in 1960, and operated it until her retirement in 1969. At that time, she donated the remaining stock of postcards from the studio to the Cherokee Strip Museum in Arkansas City. These, as well as the larger 6x8 prints that shared the same images, were sold at the museum. A newspaper story reports the building had served as offices for lawyers and city officials for the 40 years since the closing of business. Otis Morrow, who had worked at the building all those years, said he found Cornish's typed paper, My Life on Fifth Avenue, in the basement of the building, which he had used to develop pictures. I just happened to stumble on it, he said. I also found many glass negatives, all of which I donated to KU. They are now housed in the Kenneth Spencer Research Library at the University of Kansas in Lawrence, and a location I will visit soon. Technically, Kansas and Arkansas stem from the same basic root of the name Kakazi, which is a native root for the Kansas tribe, often thought to mean people of the South Wind. Kansas is from the English spelling, so we pronounce the final S. The French, however, left their mark on Arkansas's pronunciation. French explorers learned of a sect of the Quapaw, an Indian tribe in the territory now known as Arkansas, and they called their people the downstream people. They were most likely related to the Kansas tribe. The French language often drops the final letter in speaking, hence the name Arkansas. During the early days of statehood, Arkansas's 2 U.S. senators were divided on the spelling and pronunciation of the state. One was always introduced as a senator from Arkansas, and the other as a senator from Arkansas. In 1881, the state's General Assembly passed a resolution declaring that the state's name should be spelled Arkansas, but pronounced Arkansas. The pronunciation preserves the memory of the Indians, who were the original inhabitants of our state, while the spelling clearly dictates the nationality of French adventurers who first explored the region. Natives to the area have solved this problem by deeming the name of the town Ark City, most commonly pronounced Arkansas in the state of Kansas, but hey, call it what you want. And that's going to conclude my presentation. This is an image of the reference book and checklist that I have helped with the help of Morgan Williams. It's the newest edition of such. I made off a limited run of copies. It explores what we have talked about here today, and also adds on some more information on the different postcards, different captions to the postcards, and a little bit more about the 1889 land run that affected Ark City. I have it available. It can be mailed out for $15. If anybody is interested, I'm not looking to make a profit out of it. This is just interesting to me, and I hope you found it interesting, and I certainly appreciate your time being spent with us today. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Golly, Phil, that was wonderful. Really good. We want to look at the questions and comments, please, from Dennis McBurney, and we'll ask him to unmute himself and join us.
What, I guess to go not too far back, in the, it was actually the Martin postcard picture with the buffalo, the carving. You had said that it was that he had actually shot the buffalo from the front of a car, but in the picture there looks like there's an arrow sticking out of the backside. Shav and I want to know, is that really an arrow?
I'll have to look at that image carefully. From everything that I have read, it was shot. Now, if it was actually shot from that, and it's either called a 1904 Buick Cadillac or Locomobile, we might never know. And I'm not sure if that image shows it or not. But supposedly it was shot in front of the White House, which was the main residential building and headquarters of the 101 Ranch. That arrow could have been staged and put there.
Okay, that's probably stage prop then. Let's go on to the compliments. Jerry says, thank you, Phil. What a wonderful collection of photos, and your presentation skills are excellent. Doris had actually said along the same things. I think your public speaking pills are just great. Amazing images. And the other comments, Katie Clark, Land Rush photos are fantastic. Shav also, what an interesting top. Thank you. And there were a couple questions about the checklist. I had asked earlier if your old one was still available, which I guess it's not. You've got a new one now. Do we just email you and figure out the mailing and the payment?
Yeah, go ahead and contact me at my email address. It's in the newsletter, and yeah, I can get one to you, and we can take care of it.
And I wanted to say thank you for sharing some of the early exaggeration images. I'd never seen the one with the corn with the house in front of it. It's very similar to one that Martin did, but I'd never seen the Cornish version. And you said that was the one that probably had not been done in a postcard?
We have not seen that, and those are courtesy of Morgan Williams, who sent those to me. Yeah, there's a total of 4 in that cabinet card series. The one with the house we have not seen on a postcard. But again, that's what's great about postcard collecting. You don't know what you're going to find. You don't know what's out there. And
yeah,
it might be at the Wichita show this October.
What a good promo plug there. One thing Alan did, we had talked about the Albert type. He pasted in a postcard and a sepia, was it deft? Not sure what that is. Alan, you want to talk about what you put in the chat window?
Yeah, Kyle emailed them to me and asked me to put them in the chat window. So that's
it's a rate card for the Albert Type Company. So if you want to know, if you wanted postcards printed by the Albert Type Company, you knew how much they would charge you. So I thought it was just interesting to pass on to Phil and to other people.
That's great.
Appreciate that.
Wonderful.
And, I've also mailed the same image to Hal and Alan.
Great.
So.
Okay, great. Thank you. And Betty Drake, this is great. I've collected exaggerations in 101 Ranch for years and had no idea the backstory. Yeah, it's it's got its own books, I think, out there. Right.
Okay, thanks, Dennis. Does anyone have any comments they'd like to make? And please unmute yourself and speak. Be happy to hear from you.
I wanted to thank him very much for the explanation of the word Arkansas, which I asked you, but I was very confused about that for a long time, and I appreciate the explanation.
Well, we had a discussion last month. I'm not sure how we got on the subject last month of it, so I had to do a little bit digging to find out exactly why they were pronounced differently, and it makes sense now to me. So that's part of the fun of all of this is learning new things. I think. I guess in wrapping it up, I just want to say, man, these people were tough. it's hard for me to drive from Oklahoma City to my home here outside of Wichita. But I just can't imagine these settlers, these pioneers trekking across the plains like that. And you saw in those images how there was just nothing out there in northern Oklahoma, not a tree, not a bush. And, you know, there's no CVS down the road. There's no road. There's no air conditioning. There's no running water. And here you got 160 acres, and what you can drag into the place on your wagon. Just amazing that they survived under those conditions and with the weather that we have here. I'm just in awe of them. But I want to thank everybody again. I really enjoyed this.
Very nice, Phil. I just agree with you 100% about how tough they were. But thank goodness we've had postcard photographers or photographers who made some of the images into postcards. And we, you know, have those documents that we can have in our own album in our own home today. And that is just amazing also. And we're lucky for sure.
Absolutely.
Okay, last chance. Any other comments?
I have a question, Hal.
Sure.
It's Andrew Cunningham. I collect from up north of you in Canada in the prairies, the same basic sort of landscape. And mostly in the smaller towns, you would find that the leading photographer doing real photo postcards of the local buildings and attractions.
Yeah.
Because I would imagine you could produce those much faster as opposed to sending them all the way to Brooklyn to have Albertype do them. And then, you know, that took time. So was he doing those, or was he in competition with anyone locally who was doing real photo cards? Or how did it come that the photographer in that particular town didn't bother, I guess, with real photo cards so much, but went for these colotypes? Or have you ever thought of that?
That's an interesting question, really one that I had not really thought of before. I'm not aware of any number of real photo postcards depicting, you know, views of the city any more so than any other comparable size town. You know, I know he had competition, especially early on with other photographers. But yeah, that's a good question on how and why he picked Albertype to do his postcards.
They
Sure there were,
had a track record of doing other small towns, doing excellent Main Street scenes.
did Cornish or other photographers?
Well, I'm saying, but the Albertype cards, the Albertype card, I think, has a lot of excellent small town
Oh,
scenes.
yeah, I would agree with you.
Oh,
there.
for sure. How big
know,
how big is Arc City actually? I didn't catch how large a place was it? Like what was the population? But it's like a town of 10 or 25,000 or something?
No, it wasn't that big. It was under 10,000.
Okay.
I don't have the exact number. I should, but I do not have that. No, it was never over the time. There was a big competition between Arc City, Winfield, which is just north in Cali County, and Wellington to the west. For dominance in the region, as well as with Wichita, a little further to the northwest. But it's constant in size. I would imagine today, I'm just winging it, maybe 10,000 people in it. But I'm not sure of those.
Pretty close. In 2023, it comes up, it was 11,875. 30th largest city in Kansas.
Good, wonderful.
Hal,
Yes, Morgan.
just one comment. I would encourage everybody to get Phil's latest edition. He put out the first one, 8 years ago or 9. He's been working on this one for a couple years. There's probably 15 or more Cornish cards in this one that were not in the last one, and additional information. And it's just when you, as Dennis McBurney knows, when he put out the ones on Martin and Connor, and it takes a lot of work to put these out. And we need to get them distributed, because this was, and I just want to mention that, as Phil said, Cornish made 4 exaggerations in 1902. Martin didn't put out one until September 1908. Cornish didn't put them out on postcards till 1907, but he's absolutely the earliest photographer in Kansas that we know that put out 4 exaggerations. And I'll have to say that when he put them out in 1907, a year and a half before Martin, they were widely distributed. You could find those Cornish exaggerations, except for the polar bear flower ones. You could find them in great abundance. So he was the first major photographer in Kansas that distributed well-known, widely distributed exaggeration cards showing corn. And it was a major success on his part. And so I just suggest that Phil's been working on this for years, and it's a worthwhile checklist, and you'll find every Cornish postcard that we know of at this point is in that new checklist.
Thank you, Morgan. That's very nice and all very true. And Morgan, as you know, he was the very first speaker in our series several years ago, and talked about exaggeration postcards. He gave another edition of his talk at the San Jose Club meeting I guess that maybe last year, and a good turnout for that too. But we have this hotbed of exaggeration postcard makers here in Kansas, and thank goodness for Morgan Williams to have stirred the pot and to kept the interest going, and all of the things that we've learned and discovered, while he's been doing all of that, going back to his mother, reading all of the Ottawa newspapers before they had the computerization of them, but we're happy for Morgan to have done all of that. And thank you all for coming today. Any other comments before we close?
One more comment.
Sure.
Jim Potter found that the Ark City population in 1900 was 6,140.
Okay.
There you go.
Very good. Pretty consistent.
Yeah, that's pretty neat.
Thank you all.
Okay. Well, thank you. Thanks to Phil, and thanks to Dennis McBurney. And okay, we'll see you next month. Thanks, everybody.